And rolling on into the next phase of this, Shanna's going to make her way.
That's right. Yeah, segue right to Shanna
here. Straight into the budget.
In fact, even as Shanna's stepping to the podium, I would say that recalling this report you just received tonight, if no sooner informally, I know that on a calendar date that she's going to mention called Council Budget Retreat, we will have an important update. That'll still be a few weeks before the 25th, but I think will be very important to see whether or not Kent's estimation, whatever you want to call it here, his forecast here is kind of true to form or not. Also, before Shanna gets started, let me also acknowledge, I think, something that will continue to grow as a dynamic, a good, positive dynamic, but an important one for us nonetheless, and that is what Kent is beginning to do this year and really remind us that from this kind of gross increase, if you will, the important redevelopment efforts that's occurred by the stimulation of our TIF districts and the fact that now will come those values that we stimulated to have happen, but we have commitments to repay for those improvements there for the next while. And so it'll be more important. And I'll tell you in a few years, TIF 2, as it gets to be as strong as hundreds of millions of dollars there, we'll see percent changes in our tax roll that way, but know that the general fund portion of that will be somewhat deferred for a while as we have a piece of that in the TIF 2 and TIF 3 that will come to the general fund, but other portion of that being devoted to TIF obligations. TIF 1 is 100% TIF obligations, so and we're very sensitive about finding what part of our tax base is kind of inside and outside of those TIFs. We don't usually see that in the detail. In fact, we know in the detail information, the lack of detailed information we have of these preliminary fashions, we don't have that property-based and very individual-based items. So just begins to share with you that this year I appreciated Kent breaking that out, begin to kind of give that cautionary dampening effect on that. It's not gone. I think that's the other thing for the community to think about is that this is tax-based in a really positive way that's being, if you will, deferred. And one of these days when it comes back into our full tax roll, will be there. It's almost like a piggy bank relative to tax value, even as we go on and meet the commitments of certain infrastructure commitments and other things that way. So Ken had a sentence or two there, but I really wanted to emphasize to you more that the phenomena of the TIF thing will always, whenever you hear our tax roll numbers kind of go, yeah, but what's available for the general fund? Because that portion right now is going to be somewhat deferred because of those other commitments we're beginning to make in small fashion now, but growing fashion likely in the years to come. Over those commitment periods that way. But with that, Shanna's here, and we're going to take a minute. Scott,
yeah,
Mayor?
And I don't remember in the last 2 years going through the budget retreat if those numbers were actually segmented out.
They were, and I'll make sure to the certain presentation sheets this year we'll make that linkage again for you. Now, you would not have seen anything on TIF 2 and 3 to speak about, Scott, and so would have probably been the TIF 1 briefing almost kind of by itself as a phenomena up till this year when you started to get a little bit more value coming in off of that data center off of TIF 2. But and the other thing Kent mentioned here, and we'll just remind you, these are also snapshots of values as of January 1. And if we do think about the hole in the ground, so to speak, and other things that are happening here, it's always going to be, what was the value then? Only at that one time of the year, not during the course of the year. If it misses that January 1, it arguably holds for the next January 1 and is perceived as not being there, so to speak, even if something happened on the second or third or the fourth on down the way. So it's a phenomenon. It eventually gets caught up and it gets made whole that way, but that's the way that process works, Scott. But because of particularly now having more activity in 1, beginning activity in 2, I think this year when we go through budget time, we'll make deliberate attention to making sure you see that phenomena, and the tracking sheets we'll use hereafter on that. Great question. Good question. Yeah.
Any others before we get... Okay, Shanna.
Good. Well, I'm glad to be here. And the appraised values are really, if you think about this as a puzzle we're putting together, excuse me, appraised values is a key piece of this puzzle. We did want to share with you a preliminary budget calendar because we know it's a busy summer, and we know that these dates are important to you, and we need certainly council involvement throughout the discussions. The calendar that we have up for you meets the city charter requirements, it meets the state law requirements, as well as it meets our financial principles. So these are all come together, and you'll see in here there's a lot of different dates. State law requires much notice because it's really being a good stewardship of our finances. So you'll see how all of these pieces kind of sequentially fit. Wanted to highlight a couple of key dates. Currently, we are in department budget presentations. We started those May 22nd. We will end on Thursday. So it's our first kind of piece of where the department needs fall and kind of how that matches our revenue situations. From a council perspective, I wanted to make sure to point out we're looking at city council budget retreats right now on Tuesday, July 16th and Wednesday, July 17th. These would be at the Richardson Women's Club. This would be our opportunity to have a discussion with council kind of on a focused manner about some of the budget decisions we're considering in next year's budget. Then following down, you'll see August 5th. This is the first city council meeting where we get to talk about the tax rate, setting the public hearings on the tax rate, and you'll see those coming up, and then taking that record vote on the tax rate and setting the public hearing date. These are all important notice requirements as well as setting out the public hearing dates. We'll follow 2 weeks later on Monday, August 19th. We will have our public hearing on the budget, which is required by the city charter, as well as the first public hearing on the tax rate. We then follow on Monday, August 26th, on the second public hearing on the tax rate. We skip Labor Day, and we are now scheduled for Monday, September 9th. This would be a meeting in which the council would be asked to take 3 different actions. The first would be to vote to ratify the tax increase reflected in the proposed budget. The second would be to adopt the budget, and the third would be to adopt the property tax rate. We're open for any questions you may have, but we're looking forward to very productive budget discussions this summer.
Let me clarify one thing right before we start, because the word tax increase is there, and I know that it's there, and I want to clarify that. Tax increase is under state law, the definition of by the same tax rate you generate more revenue. Well, a conversation we just had a second ago says the tax base is getting larger. There are new needs, there are community needs, there are deferred needs, and so fully expect that we'll be presenting to you a budget that has a tax revenue increase, not a tax rate change, and that's basically because of the expanded tax base. Individual taxpayers may have a decreased, same, or an increased tax rate because of their individual appraisal, but it won't be because of a proposed change in the tax rate. I can give you a big hint now. I'm not going to be recommending a tax rate increase, and a big hint from you guys, no, that would not be in order. So I want to clear that up right now at this first meeting. But if you'll notice there, and Shanna correctly put it, a tax revenue increase in net notice of tax revenue increase, TRI. That is a phrase that's used. It sometimes I think creates as much confusion as it intends to try to clarify. But with respect to state legislatures, they were trying to make the appropriate notice that we're going to be having more tax revenue than we had the year before. And there's many ways you can get more tax revenue. In fact, if you're working hard, you're trying to have expanded tax base to have more tax revenue. Particularly if you have either the ongoing operational expenses to be maintained, not to mention the consideration of any new programs or expansions needed because of growth in those services. All that to be discussed this summer, but wanted to let you know and clarify that very quickly and thoroughly. We use the appropriate and required terms. It'll show up in some of the notices and things like that. You'll be asked to take a motion and a vote on something that sounds like a tax-like statement. I think it was maybe designed to make that kind of attention to it, but I want to assure you and be very transparent and clear that that's exactly what it is and all it is. It doesn't mean a tax rate change. It means we're going to have more tax revenue through a variety of ways that can happen, and in this case, we're hoping this 2%, 4%, you heard the numbers being estimated here, that would be the case on behalf of property taxes. So be happy to kind of clarify that more tonight on that point, but I didn't want Shanna finishes those remarks to misunderstand that particular titling.
Right, and I appreciate that, and I think it's going to be important as folks start to tune in as we get further along in this process to keep reminding ourselves and those watching, because it's summer, but by the time we get to the fall, I think it's really important for us to keep saying those things so that everybody becomes educated on what it really is. Does anybody else have it? Mr. Mitchell? Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Dan, I appreciate your clarification on that because it is an issue every time, and I think the motion is actually those
phrase.
Words. Yeah, it's that phrase. And so, I think it's important to clarify that we're not raising the rates. And, this is something that I've always said is the fact that, we have inflation, and unfortunately, the levels of inflation for the things that cities buy is always higher than what the actual inflation is for just the average inflation rate is. So, to me, as much as we see additional revenue, there's also additional costs that go into running a city, and so I think we're very mindful of that, and certainly I know your team is very mindful as you present a budget to us, because we want to see very efficient services, but we also want to see it done at the lowest cost if we can, but maintaining a high level of service.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Any other comments at this point?
Oh, one other thing is I'm assuming that we will be videotaping this.
We will.
And one thing that I was going to see if we might want to consider is we have people from time to time who say, well, when was the budget here, or when did you guys talk about the budget, and that type of thing is what I'm thinking is maybe on CITV or somewhere we could say, maybe we could publicize when the budget discussions are going to be.
I think we'll do that, as well as I think
Great
the
idea.
calendar confirmation with you tonight lets us begin to put some of those words out
I
there.
I just think that we do get comments from time to time, whether it's legitimate or not. I don't even want to dispute that, but I think that if we can put the information out there and say, we're going to do it on this date, and we tell them and we tell them and we tell them, and then we're even going to videotape it.
Right.
You can watch it live, and then you can come back and watch it. You can come. I just think it's very important that we communicate this, because we certainly want citizen input and certain citizen involvement if we can.
Good comments, Mr. Mitchell. Anybody else have any items on this particular? Mr. Johnson, yes.
Mayor, one other thing, and that is, in addition to this schedule and certainly the two-day retreat, we are, like we began to do in the last few years, I think we're going to find occasionally a more expanded topic that, because of your 2 extra nights of your week being devoted to the retreat, we want that to be 2 nights that can kind of go into particulars of the budget, but can also show how they are all connected. And to really, though, have some of the components in place, we really are beginning to identify key areas that I know have already been communicated through conversations with you, as well as our assessment of the budget process. And we'll probably use some work session evenings on Mondays between now and that mid-July time frame. For example, street maintenance, a few of those topics like that, where we'll do a deeper dive, if you will, about budget considerations and strategies we have in place. Be able to take multiple minutes, hours, if we need to, on a particular topic in a work session night, so that by reference during the retreat we can kind of speak back to that time without having it be the first time we had to kind of heavy deep dive on those subjects. Don't want to keep you on the retreat from going to any subject you'd like to, but really think that, and certainly would ask you through the mayor or my office certainly to let us know if there's other things that are on your mind, but I have a good list here of ones that you've already communicated, and we'll be using some of the June and July retreat times to kind of bear out on those things, a couple of those on some of the same Monday nights, so that, again, when we come to that retreat time, I think we can pull together the consensus or the essence of our thinking and let that be in our budget retreat discussion as well. So, Mayor, we'll be committed to doing that as well.
Great. Appreciate that. All right. Thank you very much.